Hello and welcome to God Day. There are times in our lives where God gives us an idea, He gives us a mission, a venture, and it might seem like a really big project, or it might be a task, and we will feel unequipped, incapable, undeserving, outnumbered. But the thing about God is that when He wants to do something, He doesn't do it, or He doesn't want it to be done the way that we expect it to be. In fact, He does it in a way so that you will know that He has a hand in it. If you had lots of money, for instance, before you started a big project, you wouldn't need God's help at all. You wouldn't even need to pray about it because you have all the funds at hand. And if you were fully equipped for a task, you wouldn't need to seek the face of God. You would just go ahead and do it because you knew that you were capable. And you would put it down to your own efforts and your own abilities. God used many people in the Bible despite their weaknesses and shortcomings. He didn't choose them because they deserved anything. He didn't choose them because they had what it takes. In fact, like the Bible says, He uses the silly things or the foolish things to confound the wise. He doesn't do things or choose the people that you expect Him to choose. So let's take Samson, for instance. He judged Israel for 20 years. And the interesting thing about Samson is that the Bible never mentioned his stature or appearance. When I look at pictures of Samson in books or on the internet, I see a tall, 6-foot bodybuilder. Every muscle in his body is bulging like he's been in the gym for 12 hours a day. And we only know for a fact about Samson's appearance is that he had long hair because he had a vow, a Nazarene vow, that he would not cut his hair. So we know for a fact that he had long hair, but we didn't know what he actually looked like. Isn't that interesting? And if we look at the Bible, we will understand, because the Philistines asked a simple question which indicates their confusion as to Samson's strength as well. Now, if he was as big and as strong as we expected, they wouldn't have been so confused. Judges 16:5 says, "And the lord of the Philistines came up unto her," and this is Delilah, "and said unto her, Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver." So it's obvious. Samson derived his strength not from his appearance, but from the Holy Spirit. And it was available as long as he kept the Nazarite vow. And so Samson is one man on a mission to destroy the enemies of God. And they happen to be the Philistines. And he does it. It's seemingly on his own, but he's not on his own. He does it with the strength of God. So let's take a look at some of the things that one man, with the help of God, could do. Now in Judges 14:5, it says, "Then went Samson down, and his father and his mother, to Timnah, and came to the vineyards of Timnath. And behold, a young lion roared against him." And verse 6 says, "And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and rent him as he would have rent a kid. And he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father or his mother what he had done." So Samson kills this lion single-handedly. Imagine a lion running towards you. You don't have a gun, you don't have a stick or a stone. They say that Samson killed this lion. He rent him, he tore him apart with his bare hands. And he kept silent. He didn't tell his parents what he had done. But this strength is definitely not a natural sort of strength. This strength is the Spirit of the Lord upon Samson. And in Judges 15, Samson is angry. Samson seems to have quite a short temper, and he's angry. Well, he had every right to be angry because his wife that had been given to him had been given to somebody else. And Samson went in his anger and he caught 300 foxes and took firebrands and turned tail to tail and put a firebrand in the midst between the two tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them into the standing corn of the Philistines and burnt up both the stalks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and the olives. I can't even catch one fox, let alone 200 or 300. But Samson did this great thing all by himself. Imagine. And in the same chapter 15 of Judges, verse 11, it says, "Then there were 3,000 men of Judah, and they went to the top of the rock Etham, and said to Samson, 'Knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is it that thou hast done unto us?' And he said unto them, 'As they did unto me, so have I done unto them.' And they said unto him, 'We are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hands of the Philistines.' And Samson said unto them, 'Swear unto me that you will not fall upon me yourselves.' And they spake unto him, saying, 'No, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hands. But surely we will not kill thee.' And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. And when he came into Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And the cords that were upon his arms became flax that was burnt with fire. It became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands loosed from off his hands." So this is another thing they've done. They've tied his hands together with strong new cords, and they have become they've been burnt. And he just shakes his wrist, and the ropes are torn from his hands. That's how strong Samson was, with the power of the Lord upon him. And then in verse 15 it says, "He found a new jawbone of an ass, and he put forth his hand and took it and slew 1,000 men therein." Imagine one man with a jawbone of an ass slaying 1,000 men all by himself. But he wasn't by himself, was he? He had the Spirit of the Lord with him. And Samson said, "With the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jaw of an ass have I slain 1,000 men." And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking, that he cast away the jawbone out of his hand and called that place Ramatheli. And in his last victory over the Philistines, we know, if you're familiar with the book of Judges, in chapter 16, he said there were lords of the Philistines. Now, by this time, Samson had been captured, and his weakness was women, and he had told he told this woman Delilah the secret behind his strength. And the Philistines had finally been able to capture him when he had his hair cut off, and they gouged out his eyes so that he could not see. And this is what the devil does. You can see how the devil hates us and how the devil wants to destroy us. And the first thing he takes away were his eyes so that he could not see. And that's why sometimes when some people are lost, you wonder, why can't they see? Why can't they understand what I'm trying to tell them? But the devil has taken away their eyes. But in this case, in Samson's case, they took away his eyes and he became a slave of the Philistines, and he was made to do a lot of work. But at one point, they take Samson into their big temple, and the Lord, it says in verse 23 of chapter 16, says, then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their God, and to rejoice, for they said, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy and destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. And it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, that they said, call for Samson, that he may make us a sport. So they wanted to call Samson to entertain them. You know, they were praising their God in small g, and thinking that, you know, the God of Samson had obviously failed him, and he was not as strong as their God. And so they called for Samson and out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they sat him between two pillars. And verse 26 says, and Samson said unto the Lord, that he said unto the lad, there was a small boy that held him by the hand, he said, suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. And now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there, and there upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld while Samson made sport. So there were thousands there. And here Samson calls unto the Lord, and he says, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged at the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up with his right hand, and the other with his left. So he's holding these 2 pillars, one with his right hand and one with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself, and with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon the people that were therein. And so the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. One man with the Spirit of God was able to accomplish so much. He would have done much more without the distractions of life. God only needs a willing heart. He doesn't need looks. He doesn't need intellect. He just needs a willing heart. And that is how God used Samson. So next time you're thinking of Samson, don't think of him as a big 6-foot giant with muscles. Just think of him as an ordinary man, because that is the kind of person that God uses to confound you and to think, how can this person be so strong? And yet he was. And that is how we are strengthened by the Spirit of God to do great exploits. Don't look at yourself. Don't look at your situation. Don't look at how you feel or what you have or what you don't have. If you have a vision, or if you have something that you really want to do, and you have trust in God, you can do anything. You can do anything. That project, that thing you want to start, you can start. Just by yourself, you can do it, because you have the Spirit of God with you. And so we see Samson as one person, one man that was able to defeat so many Philistines, thousands and thousands of them, because he was willing and he was available for God to use. And that's one man. And when we look in the Bible, there's so many other people, so many other men and women of God. For instance, let's go back into the picture, and we see the Philistines yet again. And then the Philistines we see from time to time coming into the picture, and they're always very troublesome. And this time they're fighting the Israelites in battle, and Saul is king. And when we go into 1 Samuel 17, we see that the Philistines have gathered together their armies for battle, and they were gathered together at Shoko, and which belongs to Judah. And they pitched their tent on a hill, and in between them was a valley, and then there was another hill. And Saul and the men of Israel were also gathered together, and they were pitched in the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And we know the story. It's a very popular story. The Philistines are on this mountain and the Israelites are on the other. And there went out of the camp of the Philistines a man named Goliath of Gath. Now, this is where we see the Bible describing. The Bible didn't describe Samson in any way or form. They didn't tell us what he looked like. But the Bible describes Goliath. And so if the Bible wants us to have a picture of a person, an image of a person, the Bible describes Goliath for us. And it talks about the height of Goliath. And they talked about his height being 6 cubits. And when you interpret that into feet and inches, he's about 10 foot tall. Imagine 9 to 10 feet tall. This is way above average, because our average high, very tall person is about 6 foot something, but Goliath is about 10 foot. And so, like I said, you have a description of his build and his strength, and the Bible wants you to visualize exactly what Israel is dealing with. And they talk about his helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the coat of mail is like fish scales, iron fish scales, and they weigh, and it says the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels, which is almost about 125 pounds. Imagine that, just his armor. And then he had greaves of brass upon his legs like boots, and then he had brass between his shoulders, and then he had the staff of his spear, and it was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. So this is Goliath. He's mighty, he's big, and he is fighting against the Israelites. So he stands there and he cries out to the army of Israel, and this is in verse 8, and he says to them, "Why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. And if he be able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then ye shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Because, why were they afraid? Because there was no single person among the Israelites that was as tall as Goliath or as strong as Goliath. And all that they wanted was one man to go and fight the Goliath. And there was no man like that. And yet, like I said, God chooses the foolish things of this earth to confound the wise. Who did they choose? Or who went forward and put himself forward to fight? It says David. David, we know, is the son of Jesse. Jesse has 8 sons, and amongst them, and David is the youngest. 3 eldest sons are already in battle. They followed Saul into battle, and they're there. The firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, they're all there, but none of them is brave enough to go and face Goliath. And David, the youngest of the children, went and he put himself forward. Now, verse 15 says, "But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistines drew near in the morning and in the evening and presented himself for 40 days. So for 40 days, the Philistines were taunting the Israelites. And then Jesse said to David, Jesse asks his son David to go to the battlefield and to take some food and drink to his brothers. And he takes these things, he takes cheese and all sorts of things to his brothers. And verse 19 says, "Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David arose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper. And he took and he went as Jesse had commanded, and he came to the trench. And the host was going forth to fight and shouted for the battle." Now, in verse 21, it says, "For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his what he was carrying in the hand of a keeper, and he ran into the army, and he came and he saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, Goliath comes out, and Goliath has come out, and he's speaking the same words, and David this time heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw this man, they fled and were so scared. And the men of Israel said, 'Have you seen this man that has come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up? And it shall be that the man who killed him, the king will enrich.' So, and there's promises made about the person who will kill Goliath. And as we all know the story, David is very upset because of what he hears. And as far as he's concerned, this uncircumcised Philistine, as he calls him, is defying the army of the living God. And he was talking to the people, and the people answered him after this manner, saying, 'So shall it be done to the man that killeth him.' There's a great promise. Now, his brothers aren't too happy because they're thinking this little skinny little boy that's looking after the sheep is coming, and he thinks he can do what we can't do, and they're telling him how proud he is and all that. But David stands firm, and David is upset. It's like, "What have I done?" And he actually speaks out, and he says, "I'm going to fight this giant, this Goliath." And David tells Saul. Saul tries to put an armor on him, but God doesn't need that for David, because God is going to use his own strength to defeat this giant. And David goes forth, and we know what happens. Goliath is upset because he's faced with this little boy who comes with his 5 stones and his slingshot, and he speaks to him and like, "Why would you send this dog to me?" Goliath is upset. But David has had a relationship with God. David says he has been minding the sheep. And when he was minding the sheep, he had several attacks on his sheep. He had a bear, he had a lion, he had different animals come to attack, and he was able to defeat or kill these animals. And so David knows that he has God with him, and he can defeat anything, because if he can defeat all these animals, the lion and the bear, he can defeat Goliath with the power of God. And so David goes out, and even though Goliath is fully kitted from head to toe, one small stone, David just slew him with one stone, and it sunk into his forehead. And Goliath died, and David chopped off his head. And so we see another story of one man in an army against these Philistines, and he's able to defeat the army by killing the giant. God can use you. God can use me. God can use any of us. He can use any of us to do great exploits. We just have to believe in him. Now, there's a particular story that in the Bible that I also identified with, because my daughter and I were going to open a school. We didn't have any money, we didn't have a building, we didn't have anything. But we just felt we needed to do this. And we were sitting down in church one day, and there was a sermon being preached, and it was 1 Samuel 14. And 1 Samuel 14 talks about Jonathan and his armor bearer. And Jonathan is talking to his armor bearer, and he's saying to the armor bearer, we can go, just the two of us, we can go in and defeat the Philistines again. And there's an interesting verse. It's in 1 Samuel 14. It's verse 6. As Jonathan, it says, "Then Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, 'Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few.'" I love that. It's like God can do things by many or by few. Nothing restrains him. You can be one person, you can be two people. If you have a task or if there's something great you want to do, you don't need a lot of people to do it. Because if you have a lot of people helping you, then you won't really see the hand of God and how faithful and how amazing God can be when he's using just a few people. And so Jonathan and his armor bearer go into the Philistines, the midst of the Philistines. It says the two of them alone slew about 20. But then the earth trembled and there was a loud noise and they started to fight each other and they were completely defeated just because two people believed they could do it. And so my message to you today is, you don't have to be many to accomplish great things. You don't have to be big to accomplish large things. If there's something you want to do, do it. With the help of God, once you have the Spirit of God with you, you can do anything. What does the Bible say? It talks about when we pray. It talks about 10,000 and 1,000. It says one can slay 10,000. So God doesn't need numbers to accomplish great things. What did Jesus and his disciples do? One man, Jesus, came to this earth to die for all of us. He built up a team of 12 and they turned the world upside down. They changed, because of Jesus and the 12 disciples, thousands, millions have been saved, and thousands and millions are working miracles in his name. Just Jesus and his 12 disciples, they started, and look at where we are today. So go out and do that thing that you want to do. Don't be afraid, because God is with you. The power of his Spirit will come upon you and you can do great exploits. You can build, you can do anything. You can go out and destroy the enemy. A few Christians praying together can destroy the plans of the enemy, which are great. But just a handful of Christians coming together. So don't think of your numbers. You might be a small church, but you could do great exploits if you just come together, because it says where 2 or 3 are, the Spirit of God is with you, and you don't need that many people. So go forth and do great exploits, because God is with you, God is with me, and we can do great things in his name. I pray this word blesses you today and touches you today. I pray that this word encourages you today and causes you to go out and do that thing that you think you can't do. You can do it, because God is with you. Have a wonderful God day today. Thank you.